talking to we have 25 people that have joined us. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first virtual tech session. Please bear with us. The technology is all new to everybody here, but we'll get through this. And we have with us today our three presenters. Everybody probably knows most of them. Russ Thompson, of course, is very active in his repair and restoration business with Healey's and has been for many years. We have Peter Roses. Peter is very active in the Healey Club and does a lot of his own repairs and maintenance over the years, has learned a few tips and trips and tips. And Peter puts on our tech session when we're in the live mode, so he's kind of familiar with this. And then we have Steve Gerow, and Steve is well known in the Healey community, and Steve does a lot of engineering projects for Healey's, including manufacturing now his own disc brake kit for Healey. So Steve will probably give us some good comments about upgrades and modifications that can be made to your Healey's. Just a little bit about how this will work.
Don't do it.
I'll be putting on the screen the questions that have been submitted in advance, and our panelists will address those questions. As visitors to this, or attendees as they're called in the webinar world, you have the ability to ask questions or make comments during this session. And the way you do that is if you'll put your mouse near the bottom of your screen, a little black bar will pop up, and one of the selections on that black bar is chat. If you click chat, a little box will open up on the right-hand side of your screen, and you will see at the very bottom a thing that says type your message here. You type in your message or your comment or your question and hit the enter button, and I will see those, and if they're appropriate to the topic at hand, we'll introduce those, or if there are separate questions, we'll add those questions to the tail end of the presentation. So without further ado, let me see if I can show you our first question. That question came from Mr. Hubble. He says, I installed a rebuilt cylinder head on my 59-106 about 500 miles ago. I need to retorque the head. I need to remove the rocker shaft. My question is, can I just remove the shaft without loosening all the valve springs first, or can I just take off and later reinstall and then recheck the clearances? So if we could, maybe Russ, if you could make a comment about retorquing and what's required to do so.
I can take this, yeah. Yeah, it's best to just pull off the complete rocker arm assembly as a unit. You don't have to back off the adjustments first. So just take it off, do your retorquing, put the rocker arm assembly back on, and then just readjust all your valves. It's pretty straightforward. There's not that much to it.
Russ, do you commonly find that the heads need to be retorqued?
On the 6 cylinders, actually, I don't. I don't always do it. But it certainly doesn't hurt anything, and if it makes you feel better, then just go right ahead. But almost never do I find that they need it.
Okay. Peter, Steve, any comments on that topic?
Well, Russ redid my head, so I didn't do anything. I mean, he said it's not necessary to retorque it, so I didn't.
Okay. All right. Let's go on with our next question. Submitted by Steve Heck. On a 1960 VT7, what's the best way to remove and reinstall the rear axle? Do the leaf springs have to be removed first? And if so, how?
Okay, so I'm going to take that one.
Okay.
So I have some Stone Age visuals here. So this shows how far the springs hang down below the frame rails when you undo the U-bolts and remove them. Okay, so in other words, the answer to the springs is pretty simple. No. I mean, they're fine. I mean, Russ chime in. I'm doing this by memory from about 10 years ago.
You don't have to take the springs out, no.
Yeah, when you take the U-bolts off, and so you're taking your axle out, so you've disconnected and plugged the brake lines, you've disconnected the drive shaft, you've drained the juice out of the axle, so it's dry, and then what I did, switching visuals here, was I made some pieces of wood. So I did this drawing. So I looked at the frame is approximately about 23 inches on the OD on the outside. So what I did was I made a couple of 1x4s that fit across the frame and with stop blocks on either side. So these would be the stops. So they just hang down. So basically, you're able to put these two boards right across the frame, these two 1x4s, with a gap in the middle. Okay, so as I recall, what I did with the gap in the middle was I just jacked up the pump. I jacked up the pumpkin enough to get the boards underneath the axle and in position on either side of the frame like that. And then I'll see if I can get that to show here. So this is pretty crappy, but so I had placed these boards across the frame rails. Sorry, this was the only picture I have with this old shock in the way. And then I could get on the far side and just lift up the brake. I mean, I would take off the brake drums, and if you're going to do something on the axle, presumably you're taking the brakes off and all that stuff. So I just lifted up the brake flange and pushed it across those boards. You know, I had my neighbor Buddy, Russ, or my neighbor Jeremiah, just help pull it out, and it just slid right across those boards. And I reinstalled it the same way.
Excellent.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, Steve, I just wanted to sort of add on to that I wonder, a lot of our members are looking at putting in these 3.54 rear ends.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the origin of this question is that, because that's a different answer. If you
It is. You don't need to remove the axle for that. You're just taking the pumpkin.
Yeah, maybe Russ could speak to, you've done a lot of them, Russ, but maybe you could speak to how that would occur. I think you just jack up the car and undo bolts, I think, but if you could speak to that.
Take the axle shafts out.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You take the axle shafts out and take out all the bolts around the pumpkin. And if you've got a 4-seater, you can take out the back seats and work through there. Or a 2-seater, you can just open that battery door. Usually, if I'm taking a complete housing out, I usually take the backing plate off of one side. And that makes it...
Take the what off?
The backing plate that holds the shoe.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That makes it a lot easier. And a lot of times I'm doing it by myself, so I'll take the pumpkin out first, and then I just have the pretty much bare housing to deal with.
Which is a lot lighter.
Yeah, a whole lot lighter. And if you're doing it that way, you want to take the pumpkin out first before you unbolt the U-bolts, because that holds it in place while you drop the pumpkin out. Otherwise, if it's just flopping around there without the U-bolts, it'll be pretty difficult to get that pumpkin out of the housing.
Unless it's a BJ8 with the radius arms holding it in place.
Yeah, then
Then you got all those issues.
Right.
So I guess my opinion is, if you're going to go to the effort of buying the rear end assembly, maybe you should just take it to Russ and have him install it. Know that all of the
Russ likes that idea.
he kind of does it for a living. The rest of us are trying to save a buck. I don't have to tell you where that goes.
Let me interject there.
Well,
Hang on, guys.
I have another
so we have a
comment.
few questions that have come in, a few things that have come in on the sidebar. Somebody reported no volume. We do have volume, so you'll need to check your computer settings. You probably have your speakers not turned on or something like that.
Or on mute.
Somebody asked me if I could face the camera. No, you don't want to see me full frontal. Full frontal is not good for me. Okay, and then another question is no gallery view. No, this is a webinar. The only faces you're going to see are the faces of the presenters. So this is not like a Zoom phone call with your family where you see everybody that's on the call. We currently have 31 participants in this chat room, and you'll see these three guys, and that's it. So with that, I am going to get to the next question. Okay, the next question from John Hamo. The rear end of my 66 BJ8 seems to hit hard when traveling over bumps in the road. Is there a procedure to check or test the shock absorbers, or is it best just to replace them? So,
well, I guess I can take that one. There's really not a test for shock absorbers. I read an article, I can't remember where it was now, but they went into deep detail about how you need some sort of a machine to really test the shock absorber, either a lever type or even a tubular type shock absorber. So my recommendation is that you fill them with oil. You can buy the regular shock fluid from Moss, but you can also use 20 weight motorcycle fork oil. You can buy it at any motorcycle shop. That works just perfectly fine. Fill them up and see if it makes an improvement. And if not, then it's probably best to just replace them. These things are 50, 60 years old. Nothing lasts forever.
Is that the bump stops you're talking about?
Not the bump stops, just the shock absorbers up and down.
Yeah.
And when you fill them, you need to, it's best if you have the arms disconnected, but that's not very easy. So you need to fill them and maybe drive it around some and then come back and see if you can refill them again. Because it'll work the air to the top.
okay.
So when
Go ahead, Peter.
So when I first bought my car, someone had installed like leaf springs from a Jeep. When you went over a bump, you thought that your fillings were going to come out. So when I replaced them, and this goes back many, many years ago, Gil Dobbs suggested that I put in Teflon between the springs. And that made a huge difference in sort of softening up that ride. And I think Steve Gerow has done the same thing. He's put Teflon.
I use tape. I use tape. You found window glides or something like that.
Actually, the earlier cars came with like lead plates between the leaves. Zinc, whatever, some kind of material. That'd make them slide easier. But that is another thing to look at too. If the leaf springs are all rusty and they're not sliding against the leaves against the other leaves, then that will give you a really harsh ride because your springs are basically not working.
Yeah, I'll add a little something to that that I learned on a car I'm currently restoring that I bought semi-restored. The previous owner had sent the springs out and had them powder coated and didn't bother to disassemble them. I reinstalled the springs in the vehicle and lowered the vehicle to the ground. It was sitting up pretty high. And I thought that all the leaves had been glued together by virtue of the powder coating. And I had to get in there with my X-Acto knife and actually cut the leaves, each leaf free from the one next to it. So the leaves do need to be able to slide on themselves. Hey, Russ, how about lubricating leaf springs? Do you do that?
Absolutely. If I see one that looks kind of rusty like that, I just spray it with some kind of penetrating oil or even WD-40. There's better stuff than WD-40, but some kind of penetrating oil and spray them just really heavily. And then
PB blaster or something.
Yeah.
Or Croyle.
Right, something like that. It's stuff that I like to use, but you can't buy it anywhere. It's you have to buy it from the factory. They don't sell retail. But anyway, just some kind of lubricant, and you might need to do it 2 or 3 times because it takes a little bit for it to seep in, you know. So you do that and then drive it around for a week or so and then jack it up and do it again. And see if you get an improvement, because that certainly will give you a harsh ride.
Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I used what's called high performance Teflon tape from the sailboating industry. And what it is it's 2-inch wide tape. It's PTFE tape of some kind. It's got an adhesive on one side and Teflon on the other side. So I simply attach that to each leaf on the upper side so that it slides against the leaf above it. And I did this almost 20 years ago and it's still in place. I mean, the stuff really holds up. Sailboat people use it for shipping, like when you're taking a mast out of a small sailboat and you want to shove it in a hole, you know, when the wind's blowing and stuff like that. That's what they use it for. So, you know, I was not able to find the window glides like Peter has, which are also really nice. Anyway, that's my story.
So Russ, if someone wanted to take out the leaf springs, this is another one of those tasks that can be problematic. Maybe you could speak to the replacement of the springs.
Yeah, I have some fixtures that I've kind of cobbled up to facilitate this. I use a couple of big C-clamps and this kind of however I can do it, you know, to compress the springs to put them back in. Getting them out is not so hard. We just put a jack stand under it. But putting them back in, it's kind of difficult to get a jack stand under it and then be able to put the U-bolts in, because where you need to support it is right where the plate needs to be. So
I've used a bottle jack.
Yeah.
Under the spring plate, and just move it up and jiggle the U-bolts till they go down through the holes.
That works. That's fine.
Enough to get the nuts on there.
Yeah.
Right.
This is all assuming that those big bolts that hold the spring in come out easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, as far as that takes care of the U-bolts, but the thing is, getting the springs out of the car can often be really a big deal. At the rear of the car, it's not so bad, but at the front, it's got a bolt that goes through a bracket and then through the spring bushing, and the spring bushing has a metal sleeve inside, and the bolt gets rusted to the metal sleeve, can't get the bolt out. I have had to sawzall these bolts often. It's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Before you try to take springs out, you need to look really closely and see how rusty things are, because you don't want to get halfway through it and find out you can't get it apart, because then you've got half the stuff disconnected. You can't roll the car anymore. You can be in big trouble.
You could probably disassemble the springs on the car, right? By taking the bolt out.
Yeah, you can do it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Question: I've heard there has been a rash of bad mufflers recently. You know of any other aftermarket mufflers that might perform better on a Healey? I guess this is a general question about Healey exhaust systems in general. So, anybody, Peter, you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah. I had experienced a couple of years ago. I was looking to get the car to run quieter, and I talked to Moss Motors, and they assured me that their tourist trophy kit would quiet it down. And so I purchased that. I put it on, and they were absolutely right. In the beginning, this stainless steel system, the car ran so quiet. Sadly, we go down the road 6-8 months, and all of the I guess it's stainless steel or whatever they put inside the muffler was completely blown out, and the car was so loud. So anyway, I went on a sort of looking at the different options, and I contacted Healey Surgeons, and I talked to the gal there. Steve, you remember her name?
Inan Phillips, or
Yeah.
Inan Phillips. I
And
don't know how you pronounce it.
she said, well, we buy these mufflers from England, and it's their exhaust EXH011 muffler for about $185. It's a cast iron muffler, not a cast iron, carbon steel muffler.
Mild steel.
And Russ put it in for me, and I'm pretty happy with it. And that's what I've been telling everybody: just get these cast or carbon steel mufflers. I think the older ones had thicker bodies, and what I'm sort of learning is that the heavier steel is better for muffling the sound. And I think a lot of the stuff made in other parts of the world, the steel is thinner, and that's part of the problem with it running loud or vibrating. Maybe Steve, I think you've had some vibration at speed.
I had a lot of resonance, and I bought the Tourist Trophy system, and I swear it blew all the stuffing out in the first 30 miles. It was so loud, and it had a really bad resonance right at 2,700 RPM, right on the freeway. It's like, wow, it's making your head vibrate. And so Moss sent me a different manufactured muffler because they switched manufacturers of their Tourist Trophy, and I put it in briefly, and it's good. I mean, but I only drove it for a few miles because I'd already ordered this one from Healey Surgeons, which is now in the car, which she says will last a long time, and I believe her. She knows her stuff.
Russ?
Steve, wasn't there didn't you once do a tech session on how to restuff those mufflers? Was that you?
I took mine apart and tried restuffing it. You can I bought the stuffing from England, and I put all that in there, and it was still loud as hell because I don't have welding. So, I mean, you could take one of the old mild steel. I had an old mild steel muffler from Moss. You could take that and saw the end off and saw through the the perforated pipes, and then restuff the thing, and then weld it back on, and you could do all that. It might be okay, but I did it with screws. I did a whole science project where I put these button head stainless steel screws all the way around it, and it was a huge amount of work, and it didn't do shit. It was bad. And I've been entirely happy with this muffler, which is very reasonably priced. I think it was $215 including shipping. And I asked her, I said, if I buy this from you and I don't like it, can I make a warranty claim to you and not back to England or something? She said, yes, you can. So, I'm entirely happy with that. Peter's driven it more than I have because my car's been in the shop for the last 7 months.
Okay, so Healey Surgeons was the source of this muffler, is that right?
Yeah, it's probably a AH Spares muffler or something.
Okay, all right.
Very
So
solidly made.
okay, next topic.
One other small thing to go along with that. I experimented with all 3 sizes of pipes, and because some people early on, years ago, some guy told me, I put these big pipes on and it was so loud I went to smaller pipes. I found that to be baloney. I swapped out, Peter gave me his old 1 1/4 inch pipes, or loaned them to me, and I had a 1 1/2 inch stainless bell system that I bought years ago from England, and I had my 1 7/8 inch Pacesetter Monza exhaust pipes. They were no different. So you can put the big pipes on. As long as you got the good muffler on there, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Good answers. Okay, we've got a question from Van Schultz here. He says, do you have a quick and effective fix for loose bolts where the shock's attached to the body? It's the top of the shock tower. This appears to be the cause of a clunk I experienced when driving over speed bumps and rough roads. I believe Peter Roses has a method for fixing this. Peter, do you have a method for fixing that?
Not quick. Yeah. what had happened is the mounting hole had become elongated. So every time you would, no matter how much you tightened up the bolt, eventually it would be the muffler, or I should say the muffler, the shock absorber would be going up and down within this elongated hole, and that was what's causing the clunk in my car. So what I did is I went down and I got one of these grade 8 washers, and they're pretty thick. I think I picked the 4 thickest ones I could, and drilled them out for 3/8, which is the size of that bolt that goes through there. And then I had to bevel it a little bit to get it to sit down in the space that was allocated, if you will, for the holes. Made sure that I had the right distance between them. Took it down to a muffler shop without the shocks installed, so it was a little bit bouncy, but that's fine. And had the guy weld in these hardened grade 8 washers, and I must have done that 20 years ago. So I put everything back in, and it's never been a problem since. So it's not quick. It does solve the problem. It's I don't know if Russ has another method, but that's what I did.
Okay. Russ, have you got anything there?
What Peter's talking about is perfectly fine. Usually I try to weld up the holes, then re-drill them again, and then even after that, still add a washer like Peter's talking about. One note, if you've ever tried to do this, you know that it's almost impossible to get a wrench or a socket on the head of the bolt on the shock absorber side. So what I do is I get Allen head bolts and put in there. That way you can get a wrench on it and you can get it really good and tight. I use an Allen head bolt with a lock washer and a self-locking Nylox nut. And that works pretty well.
Yeah. I wanted to add one thing, because Peter, you would not be buying a 3/8 inch washer because the hole would be too large. They're really sloppy, so if you buy a 3/8 inch washer, the hole is probably going to be at least a 1/16 of an inch larger in diameter. So you're buying a 5/16 washer and drilling it out with your drill press or your drill just so it barely fits that the 3/8 bolt just slides through with no play. Just wanted to add that.
This goes back a lot.
The washer itself is going to be too sloppy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think I found that the only washer that would really work was the 5/16. The 3/8 washer was too physically big.
Yeah.
So I remember drilling it out, and yeah.
They also have washers available that are double thick. So like it maybe not they wouldn't be at the Ace Hardware, but the nut and bolt people online have extra thick washers. They're like 1/8 of an inch thick. They're like some of the really heavy duty washers that come on the Healey. So that would be kind of cool to have those too.
Okay, guys, that's great information. That certainly is a weak point in the Healey and always has been, and controversial about why that wasn't a little bit stronger anyway. I just wanted the panelists to know, I don't know if they can see the chat room, but the chat room's been quite active. There's lots of good comments, a question or two, which I'll pose later on. But any of you participants who haven't done so yet, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, a little black bar will pop up, and there's a little icon that says chat. If you click that, a bar will come up on the side, on the right side, and you have the opportunity to make comments or ask questions and so forth. So please don't hesitate to do that. And let's move on to our next question. Okay, well, this is quite a question. Let me see if I can summarize it. Front suspension rebuilt on a BN1, replaced the stub axle bearings, etc., and installed the DWR disc brake kit. One of the upper trunnions was cracked. Just a warning for BN1 owners to make sure you check this. The BJ8 disc calipers provided by DWR were rebuilt. In my case, rough sealing surfaces on the banjo fittings. Used a Parker Stato seal. Those of you who are not familiar with that, that's a little like washer that has kind of a rubber impregnation on both sides. That seems to have worked. Anybody else have any problems with the DWR kits? So now the heart of the question. I wanted to install the offset trunnion bushings from Austin-Healey spares, but installing with the offset to decrease camber. The top of the kingpin interferes with the shock arm and locked up the stub axle at full drop. Has this happened to anyone else? The only fix appears to be grinding away a bit of the top of the kingpin, which appears to be a residual of the manufacturing process. I decided to seek some advice before moving on, but does anyone else use these offset bushings and had any problems or need to make any modifications?
Well, I guess this is for me. I put in a few of these sets of these bushings, and I've never run into this problem. I think what you're seeing is that the replacement kingpins are a bit longer than the originals. And you've got, if I understand this right, you've got too much of the kingpin sticking up above the nut. So if I'm correct, then there's not a problem with grinding some of that away to give yourself some clearance. But I don't recall ever running into this problem myself. I think I still have a set of those bushings in my own car. I can't remember if I took them out the last time or not. But anyway, if I understand correctly, this is what seems to be the problem. And if that is the case, then there's really no problem with cutting off a little bit of that top of that kingpin above the nut.
Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Next question then. Installation of a Toyota 5-speed, and by the way, in a BN1, so a little bit more complicated than in a BJ8. I'm searching for information on the details of the trans cover to extension panel joint. I've seen installs that appear to have a rubber gasket on the upstanding flange of the trans tunnel, and other installs that appear to wrap the carpet over the flange with a carpet-to-carpet joint similar to the BN1. Anybody have any details about this installation?
I really don't. I've never done this on a BN1. As far as, I guess you're talking about where the two separate pieces of the tunnel join together. I would definitely put some kind of a gasket in between there. One of the biggest problems with heat inside these cars is not sealing up all the gaps. It's not so much radiated heat through the metal as the heat coming through the gaps. So I'm not sure if that's what your question is.
Yeah. I wonder, Russ, that when he put in this 5-speed conversion, that the tower where the shift lever is now pushing up that transmission cover.
Yeah.
He's got the gap, and I think, this is just me, I think what he's wondering, well, do I fill that gap, if you will, with some foam or carpeting, because it's being pushed up by the shift tower? Could that be the root cause of what?
Only if the hole for the shift lever is not properly aligned.
Well, okay, guys, let me jump in here for a second. Okay, remember that we're putting in a transmission that has a top shifter in a car that came with a side shifter, huh? So complicated. David Deemer, David Deemer submitted this question. David, if you're online, if you go to the bottom of your screen, and there might be a little icon that says raise my hand or raise your hand. If you click on that, I think I can pull you into this commentator group temporarily and let you ask maybe a more specific question.
Go to the head of the class.
Do you see raise your hand? I've not done this before, so I can't tell you that it can be done that way. But otherwise, David, submit any more detail that you'd like to have in the text box, and then I'll read it back to the panelists, and we'll get back to this. But so it's pretty clear we're not real sure what exactly the problem is.
Foam tape is your friend.
Yeah. Okay,
Right, Russ?
I agree.
okay, let's move on. We got another question here. Like many Healeys, mine sits for 2 or 3 weeks without being started. I experienced hard starting after sitting for a week or more. I let the fuel pump run until it stops. I pull the choke all the way out, and it works and is adjusted. And then I crank and crank and crank and finally get a stumbling start. The car warms up quickly, idles, and drives fine. And I should also add, and if I turn it on the next day, it starts up right away, or turn it on 2 hours later, it starts up right away. I'm told that the timing may be a little too far advanced or retarded, which can make for hard starting. After it's warm, the car starts right up. Any ideas on hard starting?
Well, I can't pinpoint any particular reason. The timing issue, that could be a problem. You might try advancing the timing a little bit and see if that helps. My car is the same way. When I have to start it up after it sits for a while, it takes a minute. It'll start up on 2 cylinders, and then third one will kick in, and then a fourth one will kick in, and finally it'll start running. You might try ratcheting it up just a tiny bit, or advancing the timing a little bit.
Okay. More advanced, though. More advanced is what's needed.
Real advanced, I think. I don't think it's too advanced already. I think it's more likely retarded.
Okay, and then Russ, on a related topic, this was my question, so what's your opinion about starting fluid? I mean, if I hit it with starting fluid through the air filters, it'll start on a dime. Is there any damage to be done? Is there anything I should be concerned about using starting fluid?
Well, I don't know. I guess not. I'm not a big fan of it. It's pretty volatile stuff, and if you use too much of it, you can it can backfire and blow and make a problem. But otherwise, I think it's okay.
Okay, all right. Let's see here. Next question. Fuel gauge. My fuel gauge works fine from full down to about 1/4 of a tank. Below that, it sometimes reads right, and then it will flutter and go all the way up to full and stick there for a while. After a while, it returns to normal. Sometimes tapping on the gauge will get it to drop off full. Where do I start with the diagnostics on this guy?
Comment before we get to Russ.
Go ahead.
Make sure your float's pointed in the right direction, which is forward.
Okay. You mean pull the float out of the...
Yeah. As someone who's run out of gas with a 1/4 tank, I can say that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, if the float's pointed rearward, it'll hang up at the 1/4. It'll hang up on the edge of the well, and you'll be thinking you've got a 1/4 tank of gas just as the last thimbleful goes down the line.
Yes, that's a good point. I would suggest it's probably, I would think, the sending unit, if it flutters like that. However, if you say tapping on the gauge makes a difference, then generally what I do, I just take the sending unit and the gauge to my instrument rebuilder. I've got one there right now that he's doing for me, and have him calibrate the gauge to match the sending unit. The sending units that we're getting, the new ones that we're getting from Moss, are not very high quality. I've had quite a few issues with these things. And as far as I know, there's no way to rebuild the original ones. So this is really a problem. Make sure your odometer works and figure out how long it takes, how many miles you can get on a tank of gas, and that's your gas gauge.
Yeah. The resettable one on your speedometer.
Yeah, we had, and I think Steve, along with Dennis Williams and a couple others, maybe it was just Dennis Williams, sent our gas gauges, the gauge, and the sending unit off to, was it
Nice-Inger
in New York, but it took like 10 weeks to get those calibrated. So that is like 10 weeks. Wow.
Can't the guy, can't Morris do them at West Valley? He can do them, right?
Morris has done one for me before.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure Morris can rebuild the sender if the sender requires
Well,
rewiring.
it's got that hair thin wire in it. Can anybody rebuild it?
Not that I know about.
Right.
That's what's
That
been.
wire is literally it's a hair thin wire.
Okay, guys, we've got some questions from the field here.
Did we go through the list, Steve?
We've gotten through the pre-submitted list.
Good progress.
We have plenty more. Okay, so question. On a BJ8, how often should the air filters be removed and cleaned and or replaced? And describe the process, please. Now, it sounds to me like this individual has the mesh type air filters, not some kind of paper filter or something. So on the mesh filters that are oiled, service recommendations?
Well, I don't have any particular mileage specification. I think the book probably tells you how often you should do that. I think maybe every 6 months or once a year is often enough. It depends on how much air gets sucked through that tube from the valve cover into the air cleaner. Some stay clean for a long, long time, and some get dirty right away. But I just follow the instructions that says clean them in some kind of solvent and lightly oil them and put them back on, and that's all there is. As far as the service intervals, I'd have to look it up what the book says about that.
But that's for England anyway, where everything is wet.
Yeah.
So here we live in a dry, deserty climate, so we need to act like we have a lot of dust all the time.
I kind of think that air filter is kind of a stretch for what's installed.
Really, General went up and looked at the light through it.
Road and Track used to call them gravel strainers.
Exactly.
Yeah, they keep the buzzards and the pterodactyls out.
But what I would do, when I did mine, I'd soak them in gasoline or something and dry them out. But I'd also take the opportunity with some hammered silver, to repaint them and get that fresh look.
You can get the decals from Moss too.
The decals, you can really freshen them up without much effort. And then I think I would just put in some oil. They say to dip it in oil, but after I painted and got the decals on there, I just sort of spritz in some oil, and that was it. That's what I do.
Well, do they come apart?
Oh.
They don't come apart, do they?
No, because they're crimped over, if you remember.
Yeah,
Mine are the pancake.
Right.
I've always had the K&N filters.
Well, the K&N you can disassemble and you can clean
Yeah.
them with the cleaner and then put in their lubricating foam. Now that's a true air filter.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the chat board. A couple of comments here. Alex Affley says that your suggestion for socket head screws on the shock tower repair is right on. Done the same thing. We have, I think this is probably Lou Galper from San Diego. He says the Austin-Healey spares muffler on my 100 sounds good, as opposed to the pace setter muffler on my MGB, which sounds like a motorcycle. Okay, we got to be a little careful with this next question. This is directed to Russ. This has to do with evaluating cars pre-purchase. Now, Ray Torres, who asked this question, has a particular seller in mind. I think for liability purposes, the club probably should not mention the name of the seller, although Russ may know who's being spoken of. But Russ, in general, and I'll tell you that at least once a month, if not more often, I get emails through our club website from people saying, I'm thinking about buying a Healey in California in your area, but I'd really like somebody to take a look at it for me first. Give us your thoughts on pre-purchase inspection, which I can probably guess what you're going to say, but then the next question becomes, well, who the hell does that? So maybe Russ, you could talk about pre-purchase inspection.
Sure. Actually, I went with Ray to inspect the car that they bought. We actually went down there to inspect a different car, and I found that it had some issues with rust repairs, and so I steered him away from that car and into another car that they had there for sale. And so I think that in this case, I saved Ray a lot of money and a lot of headache. So it's absolutely imperative that you get a pre-purchase inspection from either me or someone who knows these cars. Because if somebody that's just a general knowledge, if somebody knows Corvettes or Mustangs or something like that, they're not going to know really where to look on these particular cars. So it's best to try to find somebody that's familiar with the particular car that you're looking at.
And expect to pay for the inspection.
Sure. I mean, I spend my time, going down there. It's almost never will I get anybody to bring a car to me for an inspection. Always, it seems like I have to go to where the seller is.
Right.
Russ, now you're up on the north side. Is there a limit to how far you'll go to inspect the car?
Well, I guess not. If somebody wants to pay the money, I'll go just about anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll give you another little anecdote here. Again, just because when you email anonymously to the club, the email finds its way to me. Local fella here from Mission Viejo, older gentleman that had a Healey a long time ago, kind of, in those years when he kind of wants to get back in. Isn't very mechanical, doesn't do really anything himself. Not a big budget. Was looking at a $30,000 car, which admittedly may have some needs, which he couldn't address himself. He would have to pay to get addressed. And a $40,000 car, which appeared to not have anywhere near as many needs. I steered him to the $40,000 car, but still recommended he have an inspection. Russ, do you sort of concur that, buying a better car, a little bit more money up front, maybe not best for you, but best for the buyer?
I think it's definitely best for the buyer. Now, like for instance, these cars that I was talking about, now the car that we rejected they are asking $49,000 for that car. And the car that we bought was like $39,000. And I thought that was a better car than the more expensive car. Okay. So again, that's where the inspection comes in. The more expensive car looked better, it had a shinier paint job, but it had the issues that I spoke about. So generally, yes, it's better to spend a little more and get a better car. But again, you just need to make sure it's actually a better car.
Okay. And Russ, I presume the reverse is also true. If I wanted to sell my car and have a good selling presentation, I could bring it to you and have you inspect it and write up an inspection report that I could give to a potential buyer.
That's true. Yes, I can do that.
Okay, let's move on down the line a little bit. Here's one of the participants is commenting that we had good topics and well-preserved presenters.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff Boyson.
Mike Scroggy recommends that I just buy.
Who was that? Was that Jeff Boyson?
Yeah.
And Mr. Scroggy also has a bunch of air cleaner decals in regalia, if anybody needs them. Okay, here's one more question. Replacing the crankshaft damper on my 58-106. Has anyone done this, and is it a big deal, and do I have to heat it? Steve, you're shaking your head.
I took mine off and I sent it to Damper Dudes, and they overhauled it, and that was about 3 years ago, and it was great. It was like $100.
I just had one done for my own car like last month. It's up to 169 now.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'm wrong about the price, but compared to $600 or $700 for one of those hot rod ones, and then modifying your front cross member, hey, I like the stock one just fine.
That's exactly right. And you know, when I called him up and told him what I was going to send it to him, he says, "Oh, you know, there's two different kinds." So they knew exactly what was going on.
What did you say again?
When I talked to the guy on the phone, I told him I was sending one to him for Austin-Healey. He said, "Oh yeah," he says, "there's two different kinds." He knew right off.
Yeah, one of them's got a separate pulley on the BJ8s, right?
Right. So anyway, I recommend it. Good job.
And the other thing you did, Russ, when you rebuilt my engine was since I had redone the damper like that, the machine shop balanced the damper. They drilled a couple of new holes in it, to balance it, so that was a good thing. Yeah, I was real happy with that.
Yeah.
Is there any particular tricks or tips, though, on getting the old one off and reinstalling the new one?
It should come off pretty easily. Sometimes you have to get a pry bar behind it and pry it a little bit, but it should not be stuck on there real tightly. If you have to pry on it, you want to make sure you try to get as deep behind it as you can, and don't pry on the edge of the pulley because it'll break.
Yeah, but maybe they're talking about getting the big nut undone off the crankshaft.
Yeah, getting the big nut undone. If it's as tight as it's supposed to be, then you need an air wrench to get it off.
Yeah.
Because there's just no way to hold the engine from turning to use a wrench, a big socket.
I made when I first did it, I took a couple pieces, 2 pieces of 2x4, and just placed them on the bodywork there on either side of the pulley, and then I put 2 3/8-inch high strength, like grade 8 bolts that stuck out far enough, and then I made 2 struts out of EMT, out of tubing, with a notch in them, so that it would give something to hold on to it with, and then put the wrench on it, which is an odd size. Was it 1 13/16 or something?
1 11/16.
Yeah, but it's something you can buy at Harbor Freight, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but the air wrench is the best way.
I presume that this is a radiator out job, guys?
Oh, yeah.
So
Radiator out, motor mount disconnected, and the engine jacked up, and probably
The linkage too, the throttle linkage.
and you probably have to disconnect the exhaust pipes from the manifolds in order to lift it high enough to get the pulley off.
I never did.
No, you didn't. I did it on the last one I did.
The flex pipes, but I have probably longer than stock flex pipes going from my headers to the muffler, so that part bent okay.
Well, actually, come to think of it, I did it on my car, and I have headers on my car, and I didn't take the headers loose.
Yeah.
I
I got by with just undoing the motor mounts and putting longer bolts in them, so the thing would slide up and down on the on the bolts, and then and then the throttle linkage undid that from the firewall.
Okay, so it is a big job.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from this, some of these more difficult jobs are probably best left to people who do it for a living. Otherwise, you can get in way over your head, and then you end up maybe getting it towed to somebody who can do it. So it could turn out you could very easily get in over your head or damage the car in some way that, whatever you thought you were saving, you now have to fix something else.
Okay, we have one more question from the peanut gallery. Looking to have a bumper re-chromed. Has anybody had any experience with re-chroming lately?
Sure.
Yeah.
You want to take that, Peter?
Well, Steve and I both have been looking at the options for re-chroming, and Steve found this place. I believe it was Bright or
It's called General Bright Plating, and it's Brite, and they're in Commerce in LA.
Yeah, just off the 5 freeway.
It was because we went to a plater in Burbank who did like zinc plating. So he replated my you originally came up with him. So he says he doesn't do chrome, or he doesn't do old chrome. He does new chrome. So they referred me to somebody in LA, and they said, "Oh, we don't do that, but call General Bright." So I did, and Peter and I both had stuff done, and we were extremely happy with it. The guy did my windshield and Peter's, your e-brake handle. But he did my windshield pieces, and they're exquisite. They look like jewelry.
Probably the best thing was that he knew Heelys. When we were down there talking to him, he pulled out his phone and he started showing us images of Heelys. So we were dealing with someone who understood how important this particular
and he does lowriders, and he does hotel fixtures. The guy can do anything. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of these lowriders they're just chrome up one side and down the other, and it's all superb.
Now, I will say that we didn't get a bumper re-chromed. So sometimes they have to hammer the bumper back into shape and do some other heroics. So maybe a bumper could be a different person.
It's all just money. Well, yeah, but he was fixing pot metal grills for old Chevys and stuff.
Yeah.
Where they solder them all up and they buff it down and everything before they plate it. It really looked like they could handle just about anything.
And Steve, would you repeat the name again, please?
General Bright, Brite, General Bright Plating. Okay. And it's in Los Angeles on Commerce. Yeah, the guy knows cars.
I'm sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
I was trying to get my bumper reshaped some time ago, and I took it down to this place. I can't remember right now in Los Angeles, not far from General Bright, in that same area. And he did nothing but bumpers. There were thousands of bumpers in there. And I had asked him for the price, and it was a few $100, maybe $300. And he said, well, why don't you just consider re-bending it, just hold it on one side and then twist it. So I was able to solve the problem. But he said he gets bumpers in that maybe have holes in them that have to be welded, have to be reshaped, bent. He does all of that stuff. And they've seen, that's all they did was bumpers.
Yeah.
So General Bright does smaller stuff, but if I were going to get a bumper done, I think I'd talk to this other company first who does it for a living, nothing but bumpers. And they seem to be, they're not afraid of anything. There's nothing you
But it did a wonderful, wonderful job on my windshield. I mean, It's just wonderful.
I'll throw in just a couple of other comments on that. Any kind of plating and so forth obviously is getting harder and harder to find with all the environmental issues.
Yeah.
But Santa Ana, for some reason, still seems to be a hotbed for platers and chromers and so forth. You can pretty much get, I've even gotten cadmium plating done, which is theoretically illegal.
Poisonous.
But zinc, yellow zinc and clear zinc, no problem. Chrome platers, as Steve said, I've found that guys who do motorcycle work, if they'll take your job, are likely to be more perfectionist oriented. These motorcycle folks are very, very particular. And I would throw in also that there is a difference between chroming new metal and rechroming, because not everybody can rechrome, because that involves stripping the original coatings down to bare metal.
Copper, then nickel, then chrome.
That's even a more caustic process than the actual rechroming of the product. But if anybody has any issues about where to find various kinds of plating and so forth, give me a call and I can point you to some of my sources down here in Orange County. And then the last thing that I would say is, if you've got a marginal piece, something that, doesn't look perfect, but doesn't appear to be rusted through the finish, I found a place called Bud's Polishing in Fountain Valley that has done some amazing work. They don't do any plating. They just take their old, dull, nasty-looking windshield surround or whatever, and man, that stuff comes back looking like the day it was brand new. So sometimes you can just go cheap and get it polished out. Okay, let's see. Somebody suggested that we add these platers and chromers to our club vendor list. That's a great idea. We should definitely do that. Okay, one more mechanical question. What's the proper type and viscosity of the oil to use in the HD8 carburetors?
I guess I'll take that. I just used really any kind of lightweight oil. Marvel Mystery oil works really well. So that's my favorite.
People use ATF a lot, don't they?
People do, yes, and that's just fine as well. It's not really critical. You don't want to use like 40-weight motor oil because that's too thick. But any kind of lightweight oil, like I said, Marvel Mystery oil is my favorite. That's what I usually use.
You can buy that in gallon cans too, so it's perfect for a shop like yours.
Yeah, you can put it in your gas. You can put it in your oil. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
What was that again? What did you recommend?
It's Marvel Mystery oil.
Okay. I bought a little bottle of this supposedly special pot oil from Moss Motors, and I can tell you that it looks exactly like 3-in-1 oil.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about it.
No, there's not.
So I wonder if we could just talk about the theory of what's going on here. As the butterfly opens, you're getting more air through there, and it's literally, help me here, guys, if I say anything wrong, it's pushing up on that piston, and you're dampening that. So if it didn't have any oil at all, that piston would rise very quickly up, and I believe you'd get a very rich mixture.
No, it's very lean.
Lean. Yeah.
Right, because
the oil retards it, which keeps the velocity up, which is the acceleration system. Right, Russ?
with no oil in the dampers, the slide comes up too fast and it just gets a big gulp of air. And since there's no accelerator pumps in these carburetors, there's no fuel to go with that big gulp of air. So it just spits it back.
Leans out, right?
Super lean.
So when you put in that oil, depending upon how thick that oil is, you're actually controlling how fast that piston goes up and down. And what Russ is saying is, in his experience, the Marvel Mystery Oil is the best for our climate, maybe, the best rate of going up and down of that piston. And therefore, that's what we're trying to solve here. There is no accelerator pump. So that's
right. Guys, I'll add one more piece to that, which I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize. That piston rides inside of a cylinder that's mounted to the whole piston assembly. But when you take that cap off the top of the carburetor, you've got an exposed area, which is not only that cylinder where the oil goes, but also the area around that cylinder. You don't fill the oil up all the way to the top of the casting. If you look down in there, you'll see that cylinder ends about maybe 1/8 of an inch below the top of the casting. Plus, you've got to allow for the displacement that little piston on the end of the plunger is going to put in there. It's going to displace some oil. My point is, if you overfill it, the oil's got no place to go but out the top of the piston and run down the sides and get inside the carburetor chamber there and just basically gunk things up. The bottom line is, don't overfill them. Leave enough room for you to put the piston back in there and not squish oil out the top of them.
And when you put the piston back in, put it in slowly so you don't force all the oil back out that you just put in. So you just drop it, put it in very slowly. So so you don't do that.
Well, Peter, you had a comment before about those two telescoping tubes. There's the one tube that comes down from the dome, and then there's the other tube that goes up from the piston, and they're a nice fit inside of each other. So that's a potential area for it being dirty, and you run a shotgun.
You want to clean.
Right?
I think the manual says that you're to wipe that clean and put a thin layer of oil both on the outside of the piston and the tube, the inner tube that you're talking about. You're supposed to wipe that clean and put a light coating of oil. I was going to say one other thing, Russ, and maybe you could help us here. You have to, the cap in some models, the cap has a vent in it, and in other models of carburetors it does not. So when that piston's going up and down, that air that's inside needs a place to escape, and there's supposed to be a vent. Correct me if I'm wrong, Russ. So you may want to just check that the vent is not clogged somehow.
Yeah, that's right. Although I've seen a lot of them that don't have vents, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't know why some had vents and some didn't.
Well, some have an internal vent that's drilled down that web at a 45-degree angle. Some of the models do, and those models don't have a vent in the cap.
Okay.
The air simply goes out of here, and it goes into the general overall piston area that goes out to the atmosphere. So It's got to have either this, and you can see this when you pull it out and you look down in there by the threads, and you just there's a hole there. It's a 1/16 of an inch.
Okay.
And most of our carburetors evidently don't have that. You know, there was a guy on the forum who had a 60, like a BT7 or something, and he had a picture of that hole. But most of ours just have the hole in the cap. It's obviously easier from a manufacturing point of view. Just have a hole in the cap.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I think we've got time. I've got maybe one more question here. This has to do with the whining noises while accelerating, apparently coming from the differential. A Lempert 354 unit was installed several years ago. Both the inner and outer pinion bearings were replaced at that time. The person who installed that gear said the carrier bearings were fine, but I'm getting a whining noise on acceleration.
Well, who set up the rear end when they put the gears in? If they didn't get all the clearances exactly right, then it's going to give you that noise. Generally, if you got a whine, it's usually a gear whine. It's not a bearing whine. A bearing is where you usually get a growl or a rumble like sound. So I would suggest that probably the best thing to do would be to pull the rear end back out and take it to a good rear end shop and have them recheck all the clearances, because it's very critical. This is why I don't do them myself. I send all those. I have a place here in the valley, Hooper's Rear End Exchange, and that's all they do is rear ends. And it pays me to drive it over there and have them do it rather than try to do it myself.
There might be somebody in Huntington Beach or something.
I'm sure there are other places around that can do that, but it needs to
4x4 people do it all the time.
Yeah, but it's not something that you can do yourself. I have done a few, but I don't do enough of them to feel really comfortable with it, because there's an art to it, and it's got to be just right.
Yeah.
Also, obviously, some special tools required for that are not in most people's home garages, including dial micrometers and such to measure backlash and so forth.
If you're reasonably handy and you're on this forum because you're handy, then you should be able to take the pump, drain the juice, pull the axle shafts out a few inches, and you should be able to pull the pumpkin out of there and take it, put it in a cardboard box with some newspapers, and take it to somebody to do this. You don't have to take the axle out to do that.
Right.
So, okay, so just
take the pumpkin. I took mine to Hooper's and they set it up, and it's great. That was 10 years ago.
So you'll have to pull the axles at least a few inches out
Yeah, pull the axle shafts out the end.
And you don't even have to take them all the way out, right, Steve?
No.
But
Once they're loose, you can take them all the way out anyway.
You're gonna want to take them all out and clean them and put new gaskets and everything anyway. So pull them out.
and then just the 4 bolts that hold the carrier bearings in, right? They're 2 like half caps that come off like a main bearing.
No. You're gonna take the entire pumpkin out of the housing. There's like 11 bolts around the outside.
Okay.
Take the entire pumpkin out, put that in a box in one piece, and take it to the rear end rebuilders. You don't take the part. You're not going to take apart the pumpkin once it's out of the car.
Right.
Do you have to take the drive end off of on the pinion side?
You have to undo the drive shaft.
You have to undo the drive shaft, but it won't all come out. Don't you have to take the sleeve off the?
What you have to do is you have to undo the tab, the lock tab on the end of the axle, and then the 2 special octagon nuts, they go opposite directions, just like the knockoffs do. So you have to make sure you're not, and then there's octagon wrenches that are available to take them off. You know, it's easy if you've done it before.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I want to add one thing to this. A lot of times you'll find that the pinion seal leaks. That's pretty common on these cars for the pinion seal to leak. So you can just take the big nut off and pull the flange out, put a new seal in, put it back together, and retort the nut. What happens, though, is when you retighten that, you take up all the wear that's occurred since was originally set up with the right clearances. You take up all that wear, and now the thing is locked up. It won't turn at all. So you wind up having to take it out, take it over to Hoopers, and have them re-shim it. So you want to be careful when you just want to replace the pinion seal, because you can find that it's get in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
Good to know.
So, Steve, could I just add one thing?
Sure.
The 3.54 rear end upgrade is one of the best things you can do. The car runs great at high speeds. It's just a great enhancement. To my knowledge, I think British Car Specialists has 4 or 5 of them. So if someone is really interested in installing this, I'm pretty sure that British Car Specialists could help you out with providing the gear sets.
Yeah, Peter, I would add to that. Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, I talked to David Knock the other day. I think he has 4 sets that are new, and he wants an arm and a leg for them, $10.50 or something a set. But I can pretty much assure you that once these are gone, they're gone. That there will not be another production run.
Now, what about the British ones, Steve?
I'm not aware of any that are still being made.
Don't AH spares, for instance, they have them.
I don't know what their stock position is. I think they're all Lemperts, though, that were made.
Oh, really?
To my knowledge, the 354 setup was made by Lempert. He did a couple, if not more, production runs.
Yeah.
The only reason I know about that is because they came to me 5 or 6 years ago and wanted to see if I could find a Chinese supplier to make another production run for them. And we never really came up with anything that I thought would be satisfactory, so we didn't do it. So to my knowledge, they haven't made any maybe in the last 10 or 15 years. But I agree with Peter. The first thing I did after I restored my Healey was put in the 354s, and it made a tremendous difference. And the only thing that was even better was the 5-speed gearbox. And
Yeah.
5th gear overdrive with the 354s is no problem. And I'm doing 2,100 RPM at 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So you put in the Tremec, right?
I put in the Tremec. That is correct. And it wasn't without its issues, but particularly the shifter was problematic. But
You got that sorted out, huh?
yeah, we got that sorted out. Actually, Terry Cohen down in San Diego figured out how to make a cut on the shifter lever itself to get it back in the right position so that it fits better. The way the original setup came, in my car at least, the shifter was too high and it was difficult to get into fifth gear, and actually the rubber bushing was kind of being crimped in between the housing and the shift lever, and it was trying to push it out of gear. So that's all been resolved. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we had a total of 34 participants today. Some may have come and gone, so that's nice. That's a nice turnout. About the same turnout we get with the live tech session. So I want to thank you all for attending. I appreciate all the sidebar comments. I think we answered everybody's questions. You may be asked to take a short survey after this is over. If that pops up, that's something that Zoom does, I think. But in any case, I would appreciate your comments. Is this something we could do periodically, or is this a one and done? We shall see. So again, thank you all for attending, and have a good day. Go out and drive your Healy somewhere. Bye-bye.
It's great.
Thank you.
All right.
And thanks to presenters.
You're welcome. We enjoyed it.
Now I got to figure out how to turn this thing off.
Yeah. Well,
Good luck.
thank you, Steve, for organizing all this,
All
for
right.
making it happen.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Let's see. Goodbye.